Yo bar, what's up and what's happening, and welcome back to It's the Yo Bar series with me, Chris Harding. So the other day, a client said to me, why is sugar demonized? Why is it so bad for us? Why can't we eat it? So I thought what I'd do for you is I would break down the reasons as to why sugar is bad for us so that it helps you on your journey towards better health. So what I thought I'd do for you is I would break down sugar and carbohydrates into two separate processes because they're very distinct in how the body utilizes sugar and carbohydrates. So let's start with process one and carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are anything such as fruits and vegetables, pasta, rice, potatoes, anything which is a grain like a refined grain such as bread. That's your basic carbohydrate. Now, when you digest or you eat carbohydrate, it's partially digested in the stomach. But then what happens is when it goes into the lower intestine, it then gets converted into glucose. And glucose is the preferred energy source that your body uses when you're exercising, when you're thinking, when you're living your day-to-day lives. So that's quite simple. When you consume a carbohydrate, it basically gets converted into glucose. And that's pretty much it. Now, with your carbohydrates, just a little bit of science here for you. You've got your polysaccharides, your disaccharides, and your monosaccharides. And basically, to break that down a little bit further, poly means many, D means two, and mono means singular. So when it comes to a monosaccharide, that is basically the conversion of a carbohydrate into a simple form of glucose. And as I said before, glucose is the preferred energy source when burning energy. However, fructose or sugar is slightly different and it has a different pathway. And I'll go into the reason as to why it's different a little bit later on in this video. But let's just go into process two. So process two is fructose conversion. So when you consume something simple like table sugar, or let's say honey, that's obviously a very refined carbohydrate and it's split into two separate molecules. The molecules are fructose and glucose. So 50% of sugar is glucose and 50% of sugar is fructose. But fructose has a different pathway, so it doesn't act the same way as a normal carbohydrate. It doesn't go into the digestive system and get turned into these very basic carbohydrates as it gets broken down into simple sugars. It has another process. So basically, it's not digested in the stomach or in the lower intestine. And instead, what happens with fructose is it's converted into fat via function of the liver. And I will explain to you as to why that happens. There is a very specific reason why your body converts fructose into fat and not into immediate energy. Again, if you want to think about glucose being immediate energy, it's energy that's given to you as soon as you consume it and digest it. So fat, the fat that we have around abdomen, subcutaneous fat is stored energy. Basically, it's not like glucose. So fat is the energy that the body uses basically for a rainy day. So when you're not exercising or you're not doing huge amounts of either physical or mental work, your body prefers to use glucose, which is the sugar. It also uses fat as well when burning energy. But the next natural question would be, well, okay, so if I consume a carbohydrate that gets turned into glucose and that glucose either gets stored in the muscle tissue or gets burnt up as energy, if there's too much glucose, if you're having too much pasta, let's say, then that pasta is going to get converted into fat because once the muscle tissue's stored enough glucose, and also there is no need for any further glucose, your body will just store glucose as fat. But why is it when you consume fructose, the conversion is different? Okay guys, so what I've got here for you is a very rudimentary timeline for you. And I was going to give you a little bit of history as to why fructose is converted into fat and it's not used as energy immediately. So if you go back to early humans and then you go to pre-agriculture, so basically before we started farming, there would have been seasons as to when we would have consumed fruit. So fruit wouldn't have been readily available all year round. It would have been consumed in sort of the spring, summer, and also in the early fall. So what we think is that fructose has got a different pathway because the body is saving or storing fructose for a rainy day. And how it does that is it converts it into fat. So when you consume sugar, or you consume anything that's highly refined, such as table sugar, sweets, candy, chocolate, things of that nature, what actually is happening is you're consuming gross amounts of fructose-based sugars, and that fructose is definitely going to get stored as body fat, and it's not going to get utilized or used as glucose in the body like a normal carbohydrate would be. So you've got early humans, and then you've got pre-agriculture, which is anything past 10,000 years. But then when you get to about the 10,000 year mark, you then get into the agricultural revolution. And that's when things start to change. That's when we start to farm grains, and we start to be able to harvest those grains and produce food that we can actually store. But it actually doesn't really become a problem for us until the post-industrial revolution and also the modern day diet. So with the post-industrial revolution, it's basically from anywhere up to from 1800 to pre-World War II. And I'm just using that as a very rough timeline as to when our food would have started to have changed, and our food would have began a form of being processed rather than it just being coming from farming, which would have been agriculture. So when you're looking at the modern day diet here today, the modern day diet is basically highly condensed with huge amounts of refined food, such as your general junk food, ultra processed food, or highly processed food. And with those foods, they are going to have more amounts of sugar. So sugar is now readily available. But if we go back in time to early humans and pre-agriculture, fructose-based sugar wouldn't have been that available. And so because of that, that basically means that we wouldn't have stored fat all the time. But if you think about the modern day diet, we are storing fat every single time we eat something which is highly refined or highly processed. And I can give you an example of this. So if you think about a bear, a black bear, they actually really like honey. And the reason why they like honey is because of the fructose in it, because they consume large quantities of honey to be stored as fat, same way that we do, because they are going to go into hibernation, okay, because bears hibernate for a period of time. And it's probably the same for a lot of other mammals, and it's the same for us. We do utilize fructose, or we do utilize the fructose in sugar, but we don't utilize it immediately. And that's because of our ancestral history has basically pre-designated us to be able to digest fructose in that particular way, and not the same as a normal carbohydrate. Okay, so we've spoken about fructose, we've spoken about sugar and why it's bad for us. So the reason why it's bad for us is because our body stores it as fat, and we're having gross amounts of sugar in modern day diets. But when you go back to pre-agricultural or further back in time than that, we'd have actually used fructose-based sugars to store as fat. That would have actually been periods of time when we would have been having extensive periods of fasting. So we wouldn't have been eating for a period of days, if not longer. And so therefore, that's what fructose basically does. It's stored, reserved energy for that rainy day. But that rainy day never comes. So here's the other thing about fructose or sugar. It has an effect on our hormones. Now, the thing is with fructose is that it doesn't spike insulin. So when you can consume, let's say, a basic refined grain like pasta or bread, it will spike insulin because it's going to get converted into glucose. So there's nothing wrong with having pasta or bread. It's only when you start to have gross amounts of that the body has got no other choice other than to turn that glycogen, which is the body's preferred energy system, into fat. But other than that, if you're only having pasta or bread or fruit or vegetable, anything with a normal carbohydrate in it, your body is going to use insulin to be able to control the spike in blood sugars. However, with fructose, insulin isn't spiked. So because fructose-based sugars don't actually spike insulin, what happens is this has a knock-on effect with our hormones. So for example, one of the hormones that's affected is dopamine. Dopamine's basically there for reward. It gives us a feeling or a sensation of reward or satisfied. And because sugar tastes so good, because it tastes so sweet, it makes us want to go back and consume it again. So we're still consuming the calories from fructose-based sugars and sugar in general, but we're never feeling satisfied. We're never feeling full from those foods, such as highly processed and ultra-processed foods, which is where ghrelin comes in. Ghrelin is the other hormone that kind of is affected by fructose-based sugars. Ghrelin is a hormone that basically tells the brain, I'm hungry, I need to eat, I want food. And normally, when you consume, let's say, a large meal, for example, ghrelin is going to be suppressed after that meal and you're no longer going to feel hungry. However, when you're consuming huge amounts of fructose-based sugars or foods with fructose in them, that feeling of being hungry still remains. So now you've got a spike in dopamine because you've started the hit or the cycle of sugar, and then you've also started, or you're going to continue, your spike in ghrelin. I'll give you an example to this. Sugary-based drinks, such as, let's say, a Red Bull, for example. When you consume or you drink Red Bull, you're consuming a very large portion of sugar within that one singular can. And because of that, it has that effect of spiking dopamine. And it also starts to encourage the other hormone, ghrelin, to make you start to feel hungry. Now, because you've had that spike, you're going to look for your next spike, because sugar is something that very much can become addictive if you have too much of it, or you're having too much of it at any given time. But you need to remember that the fructose is going to get stored as fat. And so the more highly refined food, or the more highly refined sugars that you eat, especially normal sugars such as candy, table sugar, things like honey, what's actually going to happen is you are going to start to store copious amounts of body fat rather than using those sugars as energy, because you're having large portions or larger amounts of fructose than you should be because of those types of foods that you choose. So guys, to summarize, fructose can't be used as energy, and instead it's stored as fat. And the reason is because of our ancestors. Our ancestors would have used fructose, stored it as fat for periods of fasting, or basically when we would have gone into a form of hibernation. But that doesn't happen in today's modern diet and today's modern society. Food is readily available. We don't have to hunt or gather it anymore. Food is no longer something that we as modern day Homo sapiens don't actually need to work for, prepared for us. All we have to do is consume it. And within that, you have this fructose, and the fructose is the problem, because you're now consuming something which is actually going to make you fat. What I suggest is that you think about consuming more whole foods than you do highly refined foods or highly processed foods, especially if they've got sugar in them, because sugar is going to be 50% fructose, and that fructose is going to get stored as fat, and basically it's not going to help you in your journey to a better, healthier lifestyle. So guys, I hope you found that video helpful, and actually it gives you a really decent breakdown as to why fructose-based sugars are so bad for us, why they make us put on weight, and always try to remember to steer towards whole foods and steer away from highly processed foods. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel, and also if you want to write a comment in the comment section below, I will get back to you. Until next time, be fit, be healthy, and of course, be a boss bar.